His ultimate success mantra is, I expand in abundance, success, and love every day, as I inspire those around me to be the same. He is the best-selling author of The Big Leap, Conscious Living, and The 5 Wishes, along with over 40 books spanning over 4 decades, along with doing thousands of workshops and seminars all over the world, some with his wife, Katie, as well. As a PhD psychologist, graduating at Stanford University, highly acclaimed writer, and master practitioner in the field of personal growth, relationships, and body intelligence. He's appeared on numerous radio and TV shows all over the world, including Oprah, inspiring millions with his powerful teachings. He's someone that comes from a unique creative consciousness, that when you really listen to his messages, you really think, and you think deep. He and his wife, Katie, run the Hendricks Institute, helping create a life of love, perseverance, and integrity at home and in the world. Today, I'm excited to dig with Mr. Hendricks on one of the most highly acclaimed books of all time, who wrote The Big Leap. So with great pleasure, I want to warmly welcome to the show, Gay Hendricks.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Thank you for coming, Gay, and it's early morning for you today. You've finished 2 hours of writing already this morning.
Fortunately, I'm an early riser, so somewhere around 4:45 or 5 a.m. every day, my brain goes boing, and I'm up. So I usually use the first couple of hours of the day to do my writing.
Fabulous. Is that a routine you have, like 7 days a week?
Pretty much, yeah. I'm always working on something. It may not be an actual book. Like the last 2 days, I've been working on a script for a new video I'm shooting next month, and also a foreword for a friend of mine who's publishing a book that asked me to write the foreword to it. So I do a lot of that kind of thing in the morning also.
That is beautiful. So your mind's already ready, woken up, ready to go.
Hopefully.
So I have a question that I start every time I do a show, and I want to ask you right now, what right now are you most excited about in your life?
Well, a bunch of things crowd into my mind. Let me just say that this very day, it happens that my new mystery novel is off and running, and it's called The Fifth Rule of 10. Some of your viewers may not know this, but about 5 years ago, I started writing mystery novels that have a spiritual bent to them. And I created a character, Tenzing Norbu, also known as 10. And each of the books have 10 in them. The first one is called The First Rule of 10, the Second Rule of 10, and today and for the rest of this year, The Fifth Rule of 10. And we're actively in the process of doing a television deal to turn him into a television series also. So it's been a tremendous amount of fun. That's very exciting for me because I didn't start writing mystery novels until I was in my 60s, even though I'd wanted to do one since I read Sherlock Holmes when I was 12 years old. I realized I'm going to write a mystery novel someday. I'm going to create a modern-day Sherlock Holmes. And so that's what I've been working on with Tenzing. The other exciting thing, of course, is just the whole process of collaboration with my wife, Katie. She and I have been together now 36 years, and we've been around the world 30-some times and put on 1.2 million frequent flyer miles in my case, and I think she's even more. But we've had a great experience over the past 36 years of traveling around the world, teaching our relationship seminars. And I can tell you the process of co-creating with a partner is just the most wonderful thing because it always keeps us on our toes. We always have to be fresh. If we're going to be teaching together, we can't have any stuff going on behind the scenes. So we always do our best to show up where we teach, with presence and with a real intent to be with the audience. And so we really have a great time traveling the world together and teaching our seminars and also writing our books together. We've co-authored, I believe, 10 of our books together. And so that's a big source of enjoyment, too, is the act of writing together, although it can be challenging at times.
Wow, that is... So you've been writing, Gay, for over 4 decades, isn't it?
I published my first book in 1975. And I was just getting out of graduate school, and I actually wrote my first book on a borrowed typewriter. I was a starving grad student, and I couldn't afford a typewriter of my own, so I would go over into the School of Education offices at night, where they had these nice IBM typewriters that I could have never afforded. They were sort of the state of the art thing at that time. And I would get over there and work on my book from, say, 9 o'clock at night till midnight when nobody else was around. So I always like to put in a plug for those old IBM Selectric typewriters because they really got me through my first few books before the computer age.
When you write now, are you writing on a computer or do you use like a notepad?
No, I sometimes make notes on a legal pad when I first start and I'm kind of thinking about what I want to do. But once I get into it, I just work straight on my laptop. And the way my mind works, it doesn't matter where I am. If I sit out on a plane, if I've got an hour, I can drop into that space and write. And if I'm sitting here in my office, I can drop into it. So it doesn't really matter where I am. I've written whole chapters of books rattling along on a commuter train on my way into New York City and that kind of thing. So fortunately, I have one of those brains that I can kind of turn it on and off at will. I have other friends that, they have to go to their cabin in the woods and have total silence around and a special kind of herb tea, and anything works for me.
Wow, that is awesome. So you've really created that habit over all them years where you can just get in that headspace, that concentrated effort to write whenever you feel like it.
Yeah, it wasn't always that way, but I've been at it for 40 years, so I can kind of come probably just like a professional athlete or something can kind of get into their competitive space right away. They don't have to go through a whole period of time, take a few golf swings and they're ready to go.
Can I ask you, Gay, like when you cultivated that habit, what were you doing to cultivate for maybe a distraction, environment, or where you couldn't really get in the obviously your zone of genius, but how you can do it now where you can just turn it on?
Well, these certainly help. All I've got to do is turn a switch here and suddenly silence descends upon me. So I use my earphones a lot when I'm writing, especially if I'm in a crowded place like a coffee shop or something like that.
Wow.
We've been recently having our kitchen remodeled here in the other part of the house. I'm in my office now at the other end of the house, but we've been having our kitchen remodeled, so I've been doing a lot of transporting my laptop out to various places where there weren't saws and everything like that going on. And fortunately, that process has just come to an end, so I can sit in my office now without hearing people sanding shelves and things like that out in the office.
Well, you have your beautiful cat there beside you, your cheerleader there, your support group.
Ever since she was a little tiny kitten, she's loved to sleep in my inbox. And actually, I bought a bigger inbox now because she's a big 3-year-old, and she's reached her full proportion. So I had to get a bigger inbox. But this is one of her favorite places to sit. She and her sister look identical to each other. This is Allie, and her sister is named Greta.
Wow.
And her sister's sleeping in the other room, but she loves to come in here and hang out with me while I'm writing and doing interviews and that kind of thing.
Well, I also see your book there beside you, Gay. And actually, speaking of your book, I'm going to put one plug in here in the back as well, because actually I have your book here as well. So I was taking notes ferociously this morning and last night and the night before, and was just so excited about the interview. And your book's been a game changer, Gay, and I imagine for millions of people over the world it's been a game changer. So would you mind if we just dive into that, Gay, and go into some topics?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Well, in my industry, it's a lot of fitness. It's a lot of competition athletes going on stage, competing for the first time. They're typically athletes, right? And when I read The Big Leap, I thought of our industry, because I actually run a bodybuilding federation, and a lot of our athletes are, men or women, and I thought of the upper limit syndrome, and why. I'm not sure how this would relate, Gabe, but I'd like your insight, because I feel it kind of relates to The Big Leap, is how sometimes, a competitor will start preparing for a competition, right? And all of a sudden they're 7 or 8 weeks or 10 weeks in, and almost like they're all excited before, and 10 weeks in, they all of a sudden they're like, well, I'm not good enough. Am I going to go on stage? I'm going to sabotage myself, as the upper limit syndrome is. And then you have athletes that compete, but I find they aren't conscious. Okay? They're typically doing it to mask a pain, or mask an issue in their past, or maybe an addiction. I don't know. But I want to talk about that because I'm talking hundreds of athletes, thousands of athletes all over the world who compete on a stage go through this, right? Either the first timers or the elite that do it and they aren't really even aware. They aren't even awakened up. And I read your book. It just enlightened me. So do you mind sharing just a bit on that? We can dive in that on a bit, but do you mind kind of digging in that with me, Gay?
Well, I appreciate that you're bringing up athletes. I actually didn't know when I sat down here that that's the line of work you were in. I lived for 21 years near the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. I was a professor there at the University of Colorado's branch in Colorado Springs. I trained counselors and psychotherapists there for 21 years. So I had the opportunity to work with quite a few competitive athletes. And this was not an Olympic athlete, but I worked with the family of one very well-known mountain climber who ultimately died in his attempt to ascend Mount Everest without oxygen. But during the time that I worked with them, I found that athletes often are masking something in their, something that's driving them that's other than what you would think would be driving them. In other words, it might be like in one fellow's case, he was driven a lot by anger. Things had happened to him as a kid that he was angry about, but he didn't really know that very much until he kept hitting his upper limit. And then we said, okay, what else is in there? What else is in the mix? And he discovered this old anger that was kind of like, I'm going to get back at you kind of thing. Well, that can only work for a certain limited period of time. It won't take you all the way. In other words, you can't run with rage your whole life, or you can't climb that mountain with rage. At a certain point, you've got to draw on another kind of energy that I call essence energy, who you really are down at your core. And it's never about getting even or getting back at anybody. It's about using your full resources, owning all of yourself. It's about learning to love every aspect of yourself. And that's not an easy thing to do when there are all things like anger or grief or things like that down in your system. Another thing, Matthew, is that a lot of athletes have a hidden fear of actually being out front and on top and winning because they're afraid of outshining someone else. They've often maybe learned to take second place to an older brother or sister when they were growing up. And so they have hidden down inside themselves a kind of a number two persona. They still need to be number two, even though they're great at what they do because of their original family programming. And so what I recommend with all athletes, whether you're like me, I'm a 15 handicap golfer, so I'm a hacker out there, and an avid bicyclist too. But even if you're only a 15 handicapper or you're a scratch golfer or a competitive athlete of any kind, you really face the same kind of issues that everybody else does. So I've worked with people at the very top of their game, people whose names you'd recognize, who still think of themselves as number two, even though they win hugely. They don't feel good about it because they still feel like they're in second place in their life. And so athletics, like any other great endeavor, brings to the front all of your old programming. And either you welcome that programming and learn from it, or you try to push it out. And I never recommend trying to push things out of your awareness.
Interesting. So when someone is dealing with the number two syndrome, an athlete, because actually I deal with that, Gay. I'm glad you brought that up. So if you're dealing with that, then how does one overcome that?
Yes, it's a very interesting move that I have people make right here in this office. See, the reason you feel like you're number two has to do with something in the past. It doesn't have to do with the present, right? It has to do with your old programming. Like I said, like if you grew up with an older brother or sister who's kind of like the family favorite, you're compared to them, and maybe you're even number three or number four. But you're not number one, and you can't be number one in that setting. It's in the past. That's already happened. So I have them make the following move. I have them put a hand here. I say, okay, this is now.
This is now.
And I have them then take that hand and point back to the past, wherever you recommend the past or wherever you think of the past, and you say, that was then. And then you come back and say, this is now, that was then. Do that with me a couple of times. This is now.
This is now. That was then.
This is now. That was then. That was then. And get a distinction in your body between now and then. And just that gradually over time lets yourself know that this is the moment. When you're out there doing your exercise or your drill or whatever you're doing, this is the moment, and you need to be present with that moment. So you leave the past behind, not by shutting it out, but by including it and saying, okay, that was then, but this is now.
So how many times a day would you suggest doing that?
Whenever you wake up in the morning until you hit the sack at night. No, seriously, though, anytime you can think of it.
Wow.
You really only need to do it once, the first time. You really need to get clear. If you do it the first time and you can actually feel the difference between now and then. So one time would do it, but I recommend practicing it every day. In fact, you mentioned the universal success mantra that I use. The idea of I expand in love, abundance, and creativity every day as I inspire others to do the same. See, I think we should write that, things like that, write that down on your dashboard, on your shaving mirror, on your computer, wherever you happen to see it. Like I did that when I first thought up that mantra 30-some years ago now. I still use it today. And if you look around my office, you can still see it in different places where I think about it every day, because to me, personal growth is not something that ever stops. You know, like I feel like I'm growing more now in my 70s than I was in my 20s and my 30s. And actually, I probably am in better physical shape now in my 70s than I was in my 20s and 30s, because I go to the gym 3 days a week religiously for 5 years now. I haven't missed a week. And I also ride my bike and do other kinds of things. We go dancing every Tuesday night. And so things that really, my wife has a T-shirt that says, if it's physical, it's therapy. You know, and so we do a lot of physical things, because how can you change your mind if you're not continually reinventing your body?
Well, Gay, if you were working out 3 days a week, one of the rituals that I have at the end of the show is a little bicep pose. So we're going to do a bicep pose at the end. Exactly. There you go. Well, that was very helpful, and I appreciate you digging in with that on that. So now if looking at that scenario with an athlete, so a competitor that's competing on a stage, and they're doing the exercise or feeling the change, how do they know? Is it a feeling, intuitive feeling that they feel when the shift has happened or taking place?
It's a body thing. Like, for example, notice right now, just ask your body, am I thirsty or not?
Am I thirsty or not? Am I thirsty or not?
Yeah, just notice the sensations that let you know. Am I thirsty or not?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was something you did. You sent a little messenger into some place and had that messenger look around and see if it felt the symptoms of thirst. And then that messenger came back to you and said, no, we don't feel that right now.
Ah, okay, I see.
It's the same move. It's a body thing. You need to feel it. Like, for example, I brought in some tea with me. In addition, I had a little bit of espresso left in my little espresso cup that I had a shot of espresso in earlier this morning. So I drank that, but I brought in this tea because I knew as I talked I was going to feel thirsty. So use that as a reference point to get you into your body. Now, with some people, if they're emotionally aware, I could say, do you feel sad right now or scared? And if they recognized what that feels like, they would say either yes or no. You know, if they were scared, they would recognize the butterflies in the stomach feeling, or if they were sad, they would notice the kind of heavy feeling in their chest, or the feeling in their eyes if they were going to cry, or a lump in the throat. They would recognize those feelings. Now, one of the things that we have to get better at in life is recognizing those feelings, because a lot of times, like with the mountain climber I was talking about, he would, for 3 days before a climb, he would try to keep his fear at bay by distancing himself from it, by focusing on other things. But I was much of the other opinion. I thought, make friends with your fear. Don't try to make it go away, because you see, make friends with it, because then you can draw on the energy of it. And so that was the big thing that I was attempting to have him learn how to do. But
when you make friends with your fear, are you saying facing it, addressing it, journaling on it, feeling the energy of it? Like, can you explain that?
Yes. First is facing. We have a saying here, FACT, facing, accepting, choosing, and taking action. Like, for example, I live near the ocean, and one of the first things I was taught about the ocean by my older brother was, don't ever turn your back on the ocean. Keep so you can see the waves until the moment you get on the surfboard. Then you got to turn your back to it, but you still got to, be mindful of it. But don't ever turn your back on a wave, because you might get a rogue wave that bashes you one. And so it's one of the earliest things you learn about the ocean. Well, the same thing with all of your emotions. It's much better to face them and be with them. But the second thing is FA is to accept them. Because if there's something about ourselves we haven't yet accepted, we'll run from that and try to get away from it. And that's never a good move, because you can never outrun who you really are. And you need to be friends with who you really are so that you can use that energy. And I really used this when I was working with people out when I lived near the Olympic Training Center, because those athletes, they needed to learn how to use the very last drop of their energy. They could not leave anything out there on the track or on the field. So to do that, you need to do that only with friendliness and love. You can't do that with,
right.
That kind of thing. You see people doing these crazy things in the Olympics, like lifting 500 pounds. Well, that's a time when you probably want to go, but the rest of life doesn't require that.
Wow. So, you talked about facing, accepting, and there was two more.
Yeah. Well, choosing and taking action. You see, to me, some people choose not to act in the presence of their fear. They let their fear take them down. They don't say, okay, I'm scared and I'm going to go ahead and jump off the driving board. So
Right.
It's that choice. And then you got to take action, though. You see, with writing a book, I've written 41 of them so far. But every single time I come to a place in the book, like about 3/4 or 7/8 of the way in, one day I say, this was a terrible mistake. This whole writing thing is, why did I ever take up this stupid profession in the first place? I hit the wall. And I'm not a runner, but I imagine that's what runners talk about they hit the wall in a marathon.
Yeah.
Are you a runner?
No, I'm actually a bodybuilder.
Bodybuilder? Okay. Well, friends of mine that run tell me they come to this place where they sort of, they want to quit, basically.
Yeah.
You have to find that place to go through that and find the other place. And what I'm saying is you're better able to do that with loving acceptance and facing, rather than, just machoing it out.
That is very, very powerful. So what you're saying is, with that 4-step process, facing, accepting, choosing, and action. Now the action, okay, now here's something. So when you go through that process, the 4 steps, okay, and the action part comes in, whatever action, may come up, do we listen from within, or like the intuition speaking on the right action to take? Like, how do you tell someone the right action to take? Because, you might come to me and say, Matt, here's an action I have to take for my fear, but what I could say to you may not be what you feel inside your heart.
Well, that's the important thing, Matt, because you always have to go for the heart as your true source of information. See, like, my wife and I write relationship books together, and we do a lot of relationship seminars. No matter where we are in the world, whether it's Calcutta or Beverly Hills or Chicago or the Bronx or wherever we're doing a seminar, I can almost always guarantee that somebody in the room is going to stand up and ask the following question. They're going to say, I've been in this troubled relationship for X number of years. Here's what's going on in the relationship. Should I go or should I stay? Well, they want me to answer that question. They want my wife to answer that question. But what I know is there's no way I can do that. The only way to do that, I always put it back on them. And I say the following thing. I say, okay, you don't know what decision to make now, but let's take it a year into the future. I want you to go a year into the future and look back on this moment. What do you wish you had done? Immediately they get the answer. Wow. They haven't given themselves permission because they've been kind of down inside trying to figure it all out with their mind, you see. And the mind is not very good at, the mind will always come up with two alternatives. That's the way it works. It's got a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. It'll always be boing, 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 boing. But somewhere down in here, you have to say, okay, here is what I choose and commit to. You see, so many problems come from the issue of not making a commitment. You have to make a commitment that's big enough to include when you fall off your commitment. What do you do then? Because it's the act of recommitting that's as important as the act of committing. I'm sure you've had as a bodybuilder, I know I didn't discover bodybuilding actually until I was 65 years old. In fact, I remember somebody once some years ago asking me in an interview, they said, what kind of exercise you did? And I said, well, I've written 3 bicycle touring books of Europe, so I live on my bicycle all summer. I love to play golf. I love to walk. I run a lot. I said, the one thing you'll never ever see me do is walk into a gym and pump iron. I hate that. I tried it once. I hate. Well, guess what? 5 years ago, I hired a personal trainer. See, I never had a personal trainer before. And if anybody's thinking that's a waste of money or anything, it's the best investment you'll ever make. I spend, I don't know what you guys charge in your part of the world, but I paid my guy $65 a session to train me. And I'll tell you, it's the best money I spend all month. I do it 3 days a week because it's taken me from being basically a 65-year-old person who looked 75 to a 71-year-old person who probably doesn't even look 65 now. And so I've changed my body radically. I was kind of a pear-shaped intellectual when I went in. And, now I'm a 180-pound, 6-foot healthy person. And so I owe so much to my trainer. I'll even give him a shout out, Patrick Lee. He's a terrific guy. But it becomes what my colleague William Glasser called a positive addiction. And that's what you want to create in your life. You want to have things that make you say, like when I'm not at the gym, I'm thinking about the next time I'm going to be there. That's how important it is to me. And so anything like that, I think we need to include, like a shower. Taking a shower is a positive addiction. Or getting a massage.
Yep.
Things like that we need to build into our lives.
Okay, you brought up a really great point, Gay, about a positive addiction. Okay, I want to just take that the other way around, because in our sport, I'm sure you're aware of steroids, drugs. It's prevalent in many sports, right? Let's just say because I see this with some people. In fact, years ago I've never taken a drug in my life, but I find that some people in this sport train and work out and compete to hide something as an addiction. You know what I mean? So maybe they have an addiction where, it could be a drug. It could be an addiction of, they have to be in the gym 3 times a day. They can never stop training. It could be because they want to leave their wife and husband and they're scared to do it, so they train to mask all the pain. So, when someone comes to you like that, like an addiction issue like that, how do you address it in a way to overcome it?
What I usually don't do is recommend that the person go cold turkey. What I like to do is find what the opposite feeling is, the opposite positive feeling that they're actually trying to get, and help them increase that naturally rather than trying to decrease the other one first. You know, sometimes things can be handled by going cold turkey, but a lot of times I found that in my own life, like for example, I weigh 180 pounds now, but I used to weigh, when I was in my 20s, I weighed more than 300 pounds. And I was just chatting at lunch the other day. I was having lunch with, there's a fellow named Dave Asprey who has a very popular book right now about the bulletproof diet, and he has a thing called Bulletproof Coffee and all that kind of thing. We were talking, he used to be a 300-pounder too. And what we both did was we found things to eat that we'd never eaten before. Like for me, I started eating fruits and vegetables in my 20s. And I started just asking myself, will this food, whatever it is, feed my spirit, who I really am, or will it feed my old obese body? And over the course of a year or so, I lost more than 100 pounds. But I didn't do it by going cold turkey or anything. I just started eating things that were better for me, because it takes a little while, like if you've been eating chocolate bars, to have an organic apple taste better. But now, it wouldn't be any question for me. If somebody gave me a choice between a chocolate bar and an organic apple, I would go for the apple. Although in 40 years ago, when I weighed 300 pounds, that wasn't the way it is. But I just gradually trained myself. See, I think our bodies will go toward healthy things if we give them a choice and make a commitment to do that. I made a commitment to changing my whole body, and I did it within a year or so. Now, other people, may take longer or shorter period of time, but for everybody, it's going to be based on making a commitment and then sticking to that commitment.
So here's something for you, Gay. Just came in my consciousness here as you were talking about this, and I don't want to kind of beat around the bush on this topic, but one thing I also noticed, and you mentioned about don't doing it cold turkey. That's what you were saying, right? Don't do it cold turkey. But let's just say, like I've noticed I've been in the industry for 15 years, with bodybuilding shows and running shows, all that kind of stuff. And even some competitors, unfortunately, have an addiction problem with smoking or alcohol. And
it's amazing, isn't it?
I can't believe it, and it kind of like, wow, like they're in shape, but they're like they can't handle the alcohol. So okay, so when you said don't stop cold turkey, then what would you suggest for someone listening to this show, maybe who's fighting that problem, or having that whatever addiction problem that they've got? It could be anything. Not even an athlete, for example. What do you suggest to them to help overcome that?
Well, I've helped a number of people get off artificial drugs and steroids and things like that. And sometimes people do have success by stopping on a particular day and that kind of thing. But like with smoking, I've never had success with that. What I usually do is teach the person breathing exercises that then make them feel good without sucking smoke in their lungs, because they're used to feeling good if they take a puff of nicotine and it quells their anxiety for a moment. But I show them how to do that with natural breathing processes, and then they can gradually supplant the smoking with the breathing process. The thing is, I've worked with some people on overcoming steroids, and that's a particular issue that I would prefer to leave in the hands of a professional, because I don't know all of the ins and outs of that. I know it's a big problem, especially in the bodybuilding field. In fact, as I look at the bodybuilding magazines, there seem to be two separate industries. The industries that are okay with people using steroids, and then the industry where people are doing it naturally.
Yes.
And if you look at a picture of those two different bodies, they look very different. One person looks like a horse, with no body fat and that kind of thing. Well, human beings aren't wired up like that. They're likely not going to get that way just using organic apples and protein powder. But I think it's a terrible, terrible thing, because first of all, it makes the body look very unnatural. And also, I've had the opportunity to work with some people now that took tremendous number of steroids in the past, and then they had to stop because it was wrecking their bodies. And now they for one thing, they just don't look very good because of the artificial inflation. A lot of them look very flabby now. Even a couple of well-known people that I've seen, it turns. I think later on, it doesn't help keep your muscles taut. It turns a lot of them to jelly. But anyway, I don't want to get off on an anti-steroid rant. I just want to say that I haven't personally worked a lot with steroids because I usually would turn that over to a professional just because they have so many unpredictable side effects and that kind of thing.
I took you for a loop there, Gay. You're probably like, oh man, Matt really took me for a left corner on that one. Well, different topic. One topic in your book that I really found fascinating was Einstein time. And yes. I'm going to dive in there because I didn't quite understand it, I'll be honest. So I want to get your view on Einstein time because I found the value, but I didn't understand how to implement it.
Yes, the idea is that taking responsibility for your own relationship with time. A lot of times, our old program relationship with time causes us problems in life. Like maybe you're the kind of person that shows up late for things, or maybe you're the kind of person that shows up early but is very obsessed about time. Very few of us have a congenial relationship with time where we keep our agreements with time, but we don't feel pressured by it. One of the big causes of, a lot of physical problems have to do with time pressure. They say a lot of heart attack patients are very time pressure. They're always looking at their watches and that kind of thing. On the other hand, you have a lot of people that have problems because they just don't show up places on time. They don't know how to keep their agreements. So I came up with this idea of Einstein time because of Einstein, his physics, like he had that great saying about if you're sitting on a hot stove, a minute goes by like an hour. But if you're with your beloved, an hour goes by like a minute. And why is that? And so I started thinking about that. And the reason is because when you're sitting on a hot stove, all of you is contracted. You don't want to be there. You're trying to get away from the experience you're having. And that makes you contract, and that slows down time. It makes things seem longer. The actual clock may tick by, but your experience of it is different. Whereas if you're with your beloved, you don't want to go anywhere. You don't want it to end. All your cells are wide open. You're right where you want to be in the universe. And that makes time go whoosh. Do you remember when you were a kid that you would sometimes get so into playing that you would lose track of time?
Totally. Yeah, 100%.
Totally. Yeah. And I remember sometimes my mother would say, or my grandmother would say, they called me 2 or 3 times and they could see I was there and was within earshot, but I was just so into what I was doing. Well, to me, that's the state of consciousness that is most conducive to what I call the zone of genius. One way to know when you're in the zone of genius oftentimes is that you lose track of time, because that's where you want to be. You want to be in the throes of creation, or whatever you're doing. You could be a person who likes to clean their rifles, or a person who likes to organize their stamp collection. But whatever it is, you're right in it, and you kind of lose track of time. Well, that's a cue to where your zone of genius is, because I think once people are fully functioning, they function in what I call the zone of genius. It's what they're really meant to do. It's what they most love to do. And actually, the Big Leap, that's pretty much, there's 2 big concepts in the Big Leap. The zone of genius and the upper limit problem, because the upper limit problem is what keeps us out of the zone of genius. And so we need to kind of handle our upper limit problem, and then that automatically starts allowing us to do more of what's in our zone of genius.
So in the book, you've got different ways to address the upper limit problem, how to really find those questions that you ask yourself. Is there anything that you've found, even right in the book up until then to now, that's been new or enlightening that you could add to this interview, Gate? Like basically finding and breaking the upper limit?
Well, since the book came out, I've had the opportunity to work with thousands more people. So I have, in a way, I've learned something that I do all the time, but now I know how utterly important it is. And we've touched on it before, but it's this idea of orienting your life so you're doing more of what you most love to do. So if there was one piece of advice I'd give to everybody gladly, it's start looking for what you really love to do in your life and find ways of increasing that. Or if you're in a job now, instead of, you might have to quit your job, but try first before you quit your job. Find out what your zone of genius is that you're already getting to do a tiny bit of, and then finding a way to do more of it. I'm such a big believer. It's like if you go to the gym once a year and do 500 chin-ups, you're going to be sore. But if you go to the gym every day and do 5 chin-ups, you're gradually going to be strong. As a matter of fact, a good friend of mine was 50 years old and flabby, and he decided to join a gym, and he could only do 1 chin-up at first. And so he did 1 chin-up a day for 7 days. And then he did 2 chin-ups a day for 7 days. And then the third week he did 3 chin-ups a day. By the end of the year, he's doing 50-some chin-ups a day, and it completely transformed his body. But he didn't do it in a way that was painful. He just did it in a way that was enlivening. And I'm not a big believer in that no pain, no gain theory. See, what I think matters to me when I go to the gym is not making myself hurt, but it's finding how to get my mind into my body, yes, how to get my consciousness down deep into my body, how to learn how to think with my body. And to me, the weight lifting and the machines I use are ways of getting me deep down into places in my body with my consciousness that I've never gotten into before.
Do you also practice the meditation as a means of improving that, intuition and body feeling as well?
Definitely. Well, I haven't missed a day of meditation since 1973, so I've got, a 43-year meditation streak going. And if you'd seen me in here at 6 a.m. this morning, you would have seen me sitting quietly with my eyes closed for 20 minutes or so meditating, and I do every day before I start writing. So it's a very important thing, I think, for all of us to find some way of transcendence, some way of kind of getting beyond our egos and getting into that beautiful, deep, sweet, pure state of consciousness inside ourselves that everybody has as a gift.
Your zone of genius. Now, when you talk about focusing on that area, okay, now, what would you tell somebody and how much time, I'm going to say like percent time, like I know in your book, I believe it was 70%, I believe you said. Was it?
Well, I set myself a goal of, first of all, when I first hatched this idea, I realized I'm only spending about 10% of my time in my zone of genius. So I set the goal of spending 50% of my time. That was my first big goal. And that actually took me a couple of years to get to that. But I finally got to where I was spending half my time in my zone of genius. And then I set the goal of 70%. And that took me a couple of years also, because getting from 50 to 70%, it was partly saying yes, but a lot of saying no to things that were not in my zone of genius. So saying no, as you probably learned, is a lot harder in life sometimes than saying yes.
Totally.
And so that was difficult for me to say no. But gradually I got to the point where I'm spending 70% of my time in my zone of genius. And that's what I recommend people shoot for. Since then, by the way, since the book came out, I've gotten to 90%. So I spend now 90% of my time in my zone of genius, or getting around from place to place to do it. I don't think it's necessarily my zone of genius to get on an airplane and fly to Houston to give a speech. But once I get to Houston, I'm giving my speech in my zone of genius. So I'm using part of my time to truck myself around in the world to get to where I can do my genius.
When someone's at 10% going to 50, and that's their goal, Gay, what would you suggest you tell them to heighten, or improve the amount of time they spend? Is it awareness of the activity? What would you suggest?
I think, first of all, it's finding 10 extra minutes a day to put into your zone of genius. That's all I ever ask anybody to start with. 10. And because what I found is if the person will spend 10 minutes doing their zone of genius, it will gradually turn into 20 because they will want to do it more. And it'll gradually turn into 30. And pretty soon, they're living their life making decisions about, will this feed my zone of genius or will it not? And once you start thinking that way and looking for how to maneuver through life so that it favors your genius, that's really a great state of life to live in.
I love it, Gay. Let's move into the next set of questions, the quick 5 questions called the Peak 5, Gay, okay?
Sure.
The first question for you is, do you have a coach or a mentor?
I have had many. I don't have a specific coach or mentor right now, but I've had a number of them in the years. One that comes to mind right now is a great psychiatrist that helped train me, Jack Downing, MD. He was a tremendous human being and gave me guidance. He was the first person that said, do your best to unify your life. Don't separate your life. If possible, be married to the person you work with and live in a place you love. Integrate yourself, unify yourself. So that became a big theme for me. So I've had many over the years, but I don't have a specific one at present.
That's perfect. Number 2, what is your most influential book you've read?
Probably George Gurdjieff's book, Meetings with Remarkable Men. He wrote it about 75 years ago now, I think, or 80 years ago now. But it was him traveling all over Asia and Europe looking for different sources of wisdom. And what's inspiring to me about it is his dedication, because like in the middle of his travels, World War I broke out and he had to stop everything what he was doing and feed his family. And then he got back at it and then World War II broke out. And, he never let anybody stop him. He was always bounced back. And I really resonate with that kind of resilience.
That's powerful. Number 3, Gay, what is your most influential quote?
I think it comes from the Gospel of Thomas, one of the apocryphal Gospels that was edited out of the official Bible. There's a quotation in it that says, if you bring forth what is within you will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you will destroy you. And so what it says to me is that bring forth your genius. Do everything to bring forth what is within you. Yes. In the act of doing that, you'll receive a kind of a salvation that you can't get any other way. But if you don't do that, if you let your genius sit inside you, you'll be unhappy and may even make you sick.
Wow. Number 4, Gay, if you could tell your 20-year-old self one lesson about life, what could that be?
Love everything you are. Love as much as you can about yourself and about the world, no matter where you are. Love as much as you can. Accept as much as you can about yourself, because in the act of acceptance, you get the energy to move into your zone of genius.
Wow, I love that. That's a powerful one, Gay. Number 5, number 5 is if you could contribute one thing in the world with no limits of anything, any constraints, what would that contribution be?
I would contribute to the world something that made everybody appreciate who they are and appreciate what they've been given. The chance of being born a human is infinitesimal, given we have millions of species on this planet. So the odds of being born a human being are staggering, millions to 1. And then the odds of being born on planet Earth, and look at that, there's billions, trillions of other planets and rocks out there, but we've got one where it supports life. And so with those gifts, I want everybody to feel good about themselves, who they really are, and get about the real serious business of expressing their genius.
I love it. What's your definition of mindset?
Mindset. Okay. Well, mindset is a group of programs that you rely on to help you be your best. It's a set of rules you've adopted for yourself or disciplines you've adopted for yourself that helps you navigate situations so that it allows you to be your best in every moment.
I love that definition. That's terrific. That's terrific, Gay. So, Gay, where can we find you online?
All over the place. We're at hendricks.com. You can start there, HENDRICKS.com. And there you can find a lot of information about us, our relationship work, our body intelligence work, and other things that we do. We also have a great website for our e-courses called Hearts in Harmony, heartsinharmony.com. And so that's a place to go to find out about our relationship work.
I want to make one plug for you too, Gabe, because this book is an absolute game changer. So anybody watching this video or listening to the podcast, The Big Leap, get this book on Amazon, guys. And the other book, which actually the audiobook I listened to with my wife on the way back from camping of yours, was The 5 Wishes.
Oh, thank you. That's one of my favorite books. I had so much fun writing that book. Yes, 5 Wishes. That's 5 Wishes. That's another one that really changed my life.
That was a game changer. In fact, my wife never listens to audiobooks, and she's like, oh yeah, we'll listen to an audiobook, Gay Hendricks, so we put it in there, and she was glued. So I was like, that's great. That's the first time for my wife.
Well, your wife has excellent taste.
Exactly. There you go. Well, before we close...
It sounds like maybe you've discovered the great secret of a happy life, which is to marry someone a lot smarter than you are. That's what I did, and it really works.
That's a bang on, Gay. That's a good lesson for the end of the show. So before we close off, Gay, what else would you like? Is there anything you want to share before we close off our show? Anything you want to share, an insight or a lesson before we end here?
I think the lessons of life, all, whether it's in athletics or whatever, really boil down to a couple of key essentials. There are things we need to let ourselves feel, and then there are things that we need to let ourselves manifest in the world. And the two work together. The more you can open up in a loving and accepting way of all that you are, the more you're likely to bring the best of yourself out into the world. And that's what I think, if we can get 7 billion people doing that, we're going to be a much better place.
It is such a pleasure, Gay, to have you on the show. I want to say thank you very much. I got to say, you opened up with me, and just so everyone knows, the first time actually with Gay is I actually send show notes prior to an engagement, but I had this gut feeling that I'm not going to send show notes to actually Gay, and it turned out that I felt intuitively we're going to let things flow. And I just want to say thanks, Gay, for flowing in directions of our show of where the energy kind of took us, and sharing just true gems of wisdom. So it was truly amazing. So thank you, Gay.
Thank you. Many blessings to you. Thanks a lot, Matthew.
Thank you, Gay.